Hi there, I'm Ken Cowisher from Teletune Studio. Today I'd like to talk to you about hybrid guitar tunings, what they are, and how I came up with them. After playing professionally as a bass player for quite a few years, I had an interest in learning to play cello when I was in my late 30s, and that got me interested in instruments that were tuned in fifths. So I had an attraction to things like tenor banjos, tenor guitars, mandolas. So I started to collect those. This is a tenor guitar. A tenor guitar was a popular instrument about 100 years ago. It was quite popular, and it's still popular among Celtic players. It's tuned in fifths, and it's usually tuned C, G, D, A in fifths. But some Celtic players like to tune it down a fourth, more like a mandolin, so that would be G, D, A, and E. And I've always loved them because when you're tuned in fifths, the chords are open, so you get much wider open sound, and you get a bigger range. You get 2 octaves just within these 4 strings. So I was really liking it, but I found that it was great for recording or for playing acoustic jams, but to play in bands, you couldn't really play it in a band because they just couldn't cut through. So I was always interested in getting an electric tenor guitar. And one day at my favorite music store, Spaceman, they had a tenor guitar there, and I was really intrigued by it. And I was thinking about getting it. There was a couple things. I wasn't crazy how the bridge was. It wasn't totally adjustable, and it was a little bit, I thought, a little bit high of a price. I'm not blaming the store. It was a consignment. So as I was thinking about it, I was at another one of my favorite music stores, Steve's Music, and I noticed they had these mini Strats. And what I really liked about them, they actually had an adjustable bridge that you could intonate, so that was great. And it was a short scale, which you need a short scale because it's tuned higher. This A is actually, it's a fourth above what a guitar would be. It's the A you would normally get here on a guitar. So it's got a higher range. So it's got these big open chords on the top, which is great. On the bottom, I had to figure out what I wanted to do with these 2 extra strings because I was maybe thinking of just not using them, but that seems silly to have nothing there. I might as well experiment. So couldn't keep going down in fifths because it wouldn't have been able to go that low. That would have been too far low. So I figured, well, let's go to fourths. So if you tune this to fourths, then you get it going down to a low D. So when you get down to that low D, you get that more of a, the strings are looser, but so it's like a guitar tuning down here. So you have that, and I really liked it. So I had this great big range, and I had the big open chords, and I was loving it, and I was playing it. But after a while, I started to think, you know, I really love these open chords, but I wish they were at the bottom of the instrument because open chords just naturally sound better lower. Just in when you voice chords in music, the bigger intervals are down low, and as you go higher, the intervals get closer together. So that makes more sense to me to have the fifths on the bottom and the fourths on top. But then that wouldn't work for a cello tuning. So, but anyway, since these were so cheap at Steve's, at the time they were only $127. I still think you can get these under $200, tax included. Don't quote me on it, but I know you could even get acoustic short scale At Spaceman, they have Tercer or Turner guitars for under $200 that are short scale, which you could use these tunings. So it's not a big investment. So I went and bought another guitar, and of course they come in many pretty colors. So I figured I'd get a black one this time, just because I do like black guitars. It matches my other Strat. So I had to figure out, how do I want to tune this guitar? I knew I wanted the fifths on the bottom, and I know the D was the lowest I could go. So if I'm going fifths, that would give me a D, an A, and an E. And that's the top strings of a mandola. So that's really the definition of what I call a hybrid guitar. It's taking tunings from two different instruments and putting them together. And that really helps in learning the instruments, because if you know an instrument already, then you could do it. So I had to figure out, what am I going to tune the fourth to? And my primary instrument's bass, so it kind of made sense. It's already an E string here. Just make it a bass tuning. So I went with the bass. So this is just like having a bass up high. And the great thing about this is now you're nice big open chords. See how it sounds nice down low? So I have that down in the bottom part of the guitar, and the top is a bass. And that's the great thing. If you play bass already, you will know the instrument. Having said that, it doesn't mean you're going to pick it up the first day and it's going to take a while. And I recommend if you want to take this up, just take it and play what you know as a bass player up here, whatever, just so you get to know where the instrument is. All the same things. It's all the same things, but it does feel different. And you can hear I don't sound like a bass player, but I'm just playing bass licks that I'd play on the bass. Except for even this guitar, it's not as high as the cello, but the top string is a G, so it's a minor third. It's still, this string is like this on a guitar. So you get an extra range with this too, and it goes lower than a guitar too, even though it's a short scale. So that's kind of how I came up with the idea. This instrument is tuned like a bass on the top, and it's tuned like a mandola, just the high strings of a mandola, but down 2 octaves. So it will sound weird, even if you play mandolin. Now it doesn't really, it's in a whole different range. You know the notes though. So really I recommend learning how to play both. This one would be a cello tuning, and the bottom, the only instrument I could really say the bottom strings is a lute or a viola da gamba. And most people don't know, a lot of people don't even know what those instruments are, let alone the tuning. But it's like a guitar, except you tune your B string up to a C, which is basically it's just fourths. But the patterns a guitar player will recognize. So you want to learn the parts separately first. Learn the top strings and the bottom strings just to get used to them. Then when you combine them, that's where it takes a little bit, but there's a few really neat tricks to notice when you combine them. And that is, whatever the string where you change, there's a pivot string where it goes one way it's fifths, the other way is fourths. So in the bass, this is my A, and if I go up to an A to a D, I get a D, and then a G, D, A. But if I go down, I get a D and a G. So that means anything you play going in one direction, you can play the same thing in the other direction as inverted. So for instance, here's our major chord. Here's an A major chord. But going down, see the shape? But going down, so any lick you do, you can really go in both directions. So in some ways that's pretty cool. And for instance, let's say if we're doing something like a symmetrical type of scale, like an augmented scale, then you go the opposite direction. Same with the whole tone scale. And the same thing with this guitar. If you see this, so the chord going this way, major going this way, you change directions when you hit the pivot string. So that's another cool thing about that. So we're kind of thinking about hybrid tunings and coming up with this. It kind of occurred to me about other possibilities for hybrid tunings, and I came up with a few, and one that's kind of odd, but I thought was very interesting. It's more of a theoretical thing, but if you study jazz theory at all, there's two figures, two great jazz players. One's Barry Harris, who has a diminished sixth technique of how to use a diminished scale and major six chords to harmonize chord melodies. And the other one is Pat Martino, the great guitar player, who likes to use an augmented chord. So I thought of doing an augmented diminished tuning, which is very odd, and it sounds terrible if you just play the open strings. What it is the bottom three strings are augmented, major thirds, and the top are diminished. So bar chords will give you diminished. The neat thing is the middle strings becomes a 7 chord, just because that's what a 7 chord is. So why is that interesting? One thing about it is you can play chords that you can't really play very easily on guitar. For instance, you could play all seconds. It doesn't sound good, but for playing close, or if you really stretch it, you could even do semitones like this. That might not be useful, but for playing on a guitar, it's really hard to play total closed voicings. Usually there's one voice dropped an octave, and so one of the intervals is larger than a third. But with this, it's easy to play thirds. And one of the things that Pat Martino talks about that's really interesting about augmented chords is with an augmented chord, any note you raise, so if I have an augmented chord, any of these notes I raise, that note becomes the root of a minor chord. So I have 3 minor chords. And conversely, any note I lower becomes the 5th of a major chord. And the Barry Harris, what he talks about is you can, anytime you lower a note on a diminished chord, that note becomes the root of a 7 chord. So there's your 7 chords. So all your inversions of 7 chords just have one note behind it. So you have all your inversions right there. And the other interesting, if you want to go up the same chord in inversion, if we have the first one here, since it's a symmetrical chord, this shape becomes the bottom of the next inversion. So I find these notes here. See? Now this shape here, I put it here. And you know only one note goes behind. So as you go up, you're just taking the next one down. So I kind of thought that was cool. So you can visually see things. Or if you want to play a diminished scale, It's as easy if you want to play the diminished for a diminished chord, it's just playing this shape. And if you want to play over a 7 chord, meaning playing an altered diminished, a diminished chord you play on a 7, you play semitones. The weakness of this guitar is the range. You don't have a big range because there's smaller intervals. An octave, I have to cross 4 strings. That's an octave. But there's certain things that are hard to play on guitar that this are easy. For instance, a piano lick I love to play, which is when you play a major chord to a diminished, and you can hear they're all closed inversions. Or playing a major 7, so I thought that was cool. I'm still learning this one, and there is, when you're learning it, you know, with all these things, it seems really hard at first, but it's like learning anything. The more you do it, the easier it is. So far today, all the tunings that I've shown you, you need to get some different gauge strings and restring your guitar. You won't be able to do this with a standard guitar tuning. And if you would like to learn any of them, message me and I'll send you the gauges for whatever one you want. I have quite a bit of data on this. I also have some chord sheets I made that I could photocopy for if anyone's interested in anything. I'd be happy to share some material that I've written for it. But I have figured out a tuning, the augmented diminished tuning you can do on a standard guitar. The difference between this one is it's not a closed chord, meaning it's not all minor thirds. It's a diminished chord, but so let me explain. First of all, if you have a standard guitar and you want to do the augmented diminished tuning, what you do is you tune the E string to an F. You keep your A string, you tune your D string down to a C sharp, you keep your G string, and you tune your B down to a B flat, and you keep your E string. So that means you get, the bottom's a straight augmented chord, so that one you can do all the tricks right off on a standard guitar. There's your major, so you could do that, and you can play with your augmented, which is fun on its own. The diminished, however, is not a true closed position because the bottom interval is a tritone, or what we call an augmented fourth or a flatted fifth. And then you have a minor third in the middle, and then you have another tritone. So it's a spread out chord. But those shapes, if you play a diminished scale, you'll notice you're skipping notes. So where there's a tritone, you actually have to play this. The middle string, you can do that though. But this one, you have to do that. So it's not really a total hybrid tuning, but at least you can play around with that diminished. And the same trick, all the 7 chords, one note if you loosen it, or any note you lower, that note becomes the root of a 7 chord. So all your inversions, the shapes look the same, it's just the voicings are different, they're more open. So that's a fun one to do without having to go to all the troubles of getting another guitar and changing the strings. So that should be fun. Thanks for sticking out to the end of the video on hybrid guitar tunings. My name's Ken Cowisher. This is Teletune Studio. And I'm going to finish this video off with a tune by Chick Corea, 500 Miles High, on my cello mando hybrid tuning. And I'll use Band in the Box.